All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to share our step-by-step methodology for creating digital workplaces with you. My name is Maggie Modersohn, and I have the pleasure to be your host today. Before we start, I'd like to take a few seconds to make everyone aware that we will be recording the session. So if you'd like to share it with your peers, send us a message by replying to the invite email that you've received, and we'll send you the recording. We'll also make time to answer questions. So if you have a question throughout the webinar, be sure to use the Q&A panel that you can find in your Zoom interface. You can also ask questions anonymously, so don't hesitate to make use of that feature. However, if you want to make sure that we get back to you, even if we don't have time to answer all questions, you're going to want to leave your name so we can follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, so why did we decide to host a webinar about our methodology, you ask? Well, for the past 14 years, we at Brikit have been delivering digital workplaces to Fortune 500 and fast-moving companies. And we're really passionate about helping companies go faster, work better, and move together. And it is our belief that a great digital workspace enables your company to do just that. And so today we're going to share this step-by-step methodology for creating digital workplaces with you. And by we, I really mean Brikit's founder, Daryl Duke, who I'd like to invite to take it away.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. Let's get this rolling. Great. As Maggie just said, for the past 14 years, we've been successfully designing and building digital workplaces for companies. And so today in this webinar, I'm going to show you our approach with concrete steps you can follow and the perspectives that we use when designing digital workplaces. So we have a ton of information to cover, so let's dive in. Okay, so our approach has three parts. It starts with our methodology, which addresses how we build it and consists of phases and activities every project should tackle for successful launches. It includes digital workplace design, which tells us what to build. These are the design perspectives that we use, why they matter, and how they ensure a rollout that's appropriate for years down the road. And finally, managing risk, which ensures success at launch and going forward. So today we'll cover these individually at a high level and then dive deeper to get the details and see how they fit together. Okay, let's start with our methodology and a high-level look at its phases. The phases are define, design, build, launch, and operate. Now, while this may look waterfall in its approach, it's not. It's very iterative, and I think you'll see that as we go through. The first phase defines what we're building. Here, we take nebulous goals and difficult questions, consider what's possible, and look at examples so that we can arrive at concrete storyboards that reflect shared understanding and are detailed enough to estimate and allow breaking down the work into actionable plans. Then once we've defined what we're building, the second phase is to create designs for it. This is including plans for building the site, much like an architect's plans for a building. It also includes strong branding to make users feel welcome, plus structure and navigation for a solid foundation on which people can find and contribute information. And then once the design starts stabilizing, we can start building. And here we can create the structures to house all your information. And we apply visual design to make it feel great and enhance site flow. We also pay close attention to landing pages with feeds to surface content automatically and try to set things up to support the full information content lifecycle. Now, once the building is complete, we can move to the launch phase, which is aimed at getting the site ready for the broader user community. This is where we populate the site with content, we consider change management, and we plan and practice to ensure that we have a successful rollout. Then after launch, we enter the operate phase. And I think everyone is most familiar with this one. This is where ongoing collaboration happens, and we do health and maintenance of the site and curate information, or what some people like to call gardening. But we also like to make plans for refreshing the site as it grows and the business changes in the future. So that's a really quick overview of the 5 phases in our methodology. Again, that's define, design, build, launch, and operate. Now let's pause to consider digital workplace design. Now for us, digital workplace design consists of 4 powerful design disciplines. These are our pillars. We have visual design, information design, technology design, and solution design. Let's dig into these. Our first pillar is visual design. And now this is where we can build company culture and defer complexity without dumbing things down. We use design to emphasize what's important and make sense of complex information. And we like to use design to simplify participation and make every contributor look great. Visual design is much more than branding. It increases employee engagement and enhances understanding. The second pillar we have is information design. And this is where we focus on presenting meaningful concepts, making things easy to find, and surfacing relevant content. Information design is also how we reduce information overload and keep things fresh and relevant. Here we consider permissions and security and ensure that we design for growth and change. Our third pillar is technology design, and this is where we choose the right tools and get help where needed. We like to focus on building the right thing and simplify our goals and prioritize what's needed for the first release. And finally, we aim to provide a consumer-grade experience to make the site engaging and easy to use. And last but not least is solution design. And I think this pillar is especially critical because it supports informed decisions by providing concrete goals, firm costs, and clear timelines. This is how we frame and define the purposes of a digital workspace. And it's a process we apply whenever clarity is needed on just what exactly it is that we're building. It's also how we slow down so that we can move faster. So that's a quick tour of the 4 pillars of digital workplace design. We have visual, information, technology, and solution design. And we'll have more to say on these later. But first, let's talk about risk management. Now, I'm really passionate about this one, not just because it makes good business sense, but because getting this right makes our lives better. Now, we've all been on poorly run projects, and we all know how that can take its toll. So managing risk means building the right thing and delivering a complete solution that meets the goals you set out to solve. And of course, it means launching on time and in budget. And most importantly, it means not being hard on your people so you'll get their best work and they'll stick around. So let's look at some useful techniques. So we like to use an iterative approach. It's not an incremental approach as in many agile processes because our initial delivery is complete. Then we want to refine that during subsequent iterations. And we found that this approach is essential to getting a good outcome. It allows time for necessary learning and testing to see if our designs need tweaking as we go. We also say bounded iterative approach because we plan for a finite number of iterations in advance so that we know when we're done. We also allow fluidity at the design level. We allow a change there, but we stringently adhere to project scope. So we don't want things to sprawl, but we want to make sure we have a chance to refine what we're doing. Another technique is to break things down into smaller planned projects that can be reassembled together and then track and complete those separately so it's easy to see progress and adjust course if necessary. Finally, we always assume there's a phase 2. Not only is this realistic, but it relieves the pressure for getting everything right and included the first time, and allows for deferring high risk or potentially expensive bits, bits like third-party integrations or migrations, for example. Okay, so that's a quick survey of how we think about project risk management. And if that seemed like a lot of ground to fly by, it was. We just took a high-level look at our phase methodology, digital workplace design principles, and some risk management perspectives. So let's take a breath and then dive back in deeper to weave these together to define the concrete activities that need to be addressed. You'll find that we like to tie everything we do back to our methodology because that's how we get things done. So our deep dive here will be the same. We'll focus on it, starting with a quick look at the phases and activities all in one diagram so that you can see how they fit together as a whole. I think this view makes it easier to see how the phases and activities aren't waterfall, but overlap and are iterative. And I think you'll also see how our 4 pillars of digital workplace design surface directly through our methodology. So really quickly, the define phase consists of our good friend solution design and is an activity for solution designers. Then the design phase consists of visual and information design. These inform one another heavily, so we like to do them in parallel. Also, we think these two, combined with solution design, are probably the most important activities for creating a good foundation. Naturally, this is the realm for graphic and information designers. Okay, the build phase covers building the site, of course, but also content strategy and creating appropriate training materials. This phase is for the builders, which are the power users, the system owners and administrators. Then comes the launch phase, which covers populating the site with new or existing content and planning for rollout. And here, content owners usually play a heavy role. And finally, the operate phase is for the broader community and covers ongoing collaboration, housekeeping, and ensuring that the system is running smoothly and performing well. So hopefully this picture helps things come together for you, but we're going to dig in next to these activities in detail to give a lot more context. So starting at the top of the methodology is our design phase. And this is where solution design kicks things off with the primary goal of managing risk by making things concrete, estimatable, and actionable. We want to build a loose roadmap but stay focused on the current phase. And this is a place where we want to be explicit and ruthless about what the site needs to do and what it will not do, or at least not yet. Right? And another thing we like to do is to stay within the available platform features and defer non-critical customizations or complex integrations. For example, rather than integrating a Workday or Salesforce data in phase one, why not consider linking to those systems this time and come back later once we've learned more about the systems and how they can fit together. And remember that with any new platform, there's a lot of learning to do before we can make confident decisions and avoid expensive mistakes. So that means taking time to do your homework or getting some help. Okay, let's jump out of methodology for a moment and step over into digital workplace design and talk about what solution design is. So solution design is a 5-step process that we've developed that starts with organizing a team, design team with all the right people involved. These are the people that are going to provide coverage for all the perspectives needed for the project. And the first step of the solution design is definition. This is where we set high-level goals and consider what's possible. We like to identify information design concerns and past challenges and talk about special needs and really do what we can to define what we're building. Then what we do is take that definition back to sponsors and stakeholders to incorporate feedback. This is a great time to make change because talk is cheap, right? Once that starts to solidify or is set, we can go independently and find inspiration through past work, look at outside examples and do research, and then use that inspiration to create possible designs to answer the goals that we set in definition. Once we have those designs, we can get together again and pick the best ones to create storyboards for the system. Now, this can be anything from screenshots to whiteboard snapshots or whiteboard photographs. What you're after is a clear and shared understanding among all team members that's detailed enough to create estimates for both time and effort. And finally, go back to the sponsors and stakeholders to test those ideas and make sure there are no holes. Then we can incorporate any final feedback and prepare estimates. Okay, now back to the methodology column. Excuse me. Now that we've defined what we're building, we're ready for the design phase. And we're going to explore the information design activity first. Now, this is where we define and design easily recognized structures so that we're presenting business concepts, not tool concepts, and that's really important. But because structures can only represent one perspective, we like to design a meaningful taxonomy that cuts across the structure using labels to allow more precise searching and surfacing content to satisfy many different perspectives. And of course, you'll want to design intuitive navigation and design for security and permissions. And now frequently permissions affect a navigation and structure, so we like to look at all of these things holistically in this phase. Okay, one more slide on information design. Here again, we want to support the full information content lifecycle, which includes routing and publishing workflows to get information to the right people in the right order. It also includes scheduling content and, very important, policies for review and archiving that in order to keep things fresh and relevant. We also want to design to eliminate duplication where we can by being clear where things go and where to find them. That also means reuse, not just content, but also elements such as page layouts and headers and menus and footers, and can also even include things such as blueprints or templates. And speaking of blueprints and templates, we also want to try to automate contribution using those kinds of things to achieve consistency and make contribution easier and faster. And finally, we like to look for opportunities to create self-maintaining feeds. Here we're looking at landing pages that nobody really wants to be responsible for updating, but are important places to surface information and what's current in the site. Okay, still within the design phase, let's explore the visual design activity. This includes color palettes, fonts, logos, plus whatever else you can do to make the site feel like home. This is super important for user adoption. But visual design can also help with information consumption by prioritizing that consumption and helping with site flow. Also, visual design should provide consistency to ease both consumption and contribution. And finally, think consumer grade again to make the system fun and easy to use. Doing so also drives the contribution to be simpler and ensures that the system will make every contributor look good when they do so. Okay, once the design stabilized, we're ready to move on to the build phase of the methodology. Let's start with the build out activity. This is all about stamping out the structures according to your designs and applying labels from your taxonomy. It's about wiring the menus and navigation elements. It's about configuring our landing pages with feeds and configuring all those security settings. Okay. Also in the build phase, we like to think about content strategy as an activity, and that's all about creating those blueprints, whether for chunks of the site or individual pages or even smaller components than that. It's about configuring workflows to properly route information and setting up your draft and publishing mechanisms to allow for experimentation, learning, or formal review. We like to consider content scheduling, which can be useful in many applications. And finally, and this is crucial, again, configuring review and archive policies to guard against stale content and keep the mountain of garbage out of our way. Okay, the last activity in the build phase is creating a user guide, which is to provide critical support for content owners and advanced users. Now, this isn't a comprehensive user manual for the whole platform, but rather it documents the use of the system as designed and built for your users, right? And finally, be sure that this is available from within the system. Or in other words, don't rely on the vendor's website, please. Your users won't go there. Okay, let's step out of the methodology track for a moment and pop back into digital workplace design to look again at solution design. Because for each area being built out, lack of clarity can let risk seep in. Right? So remember that our automatic reaction whenever things aren't concrete is to pause for a quick solution design. And this is the same process we saw in the define phase, but here we're going to zoom in and focus on creating storyboards for the specific component that we're building. And since you've seen these steps before, we don't need to talk through them, we can move on. Okay, let's finish out the build phase with a short pause for managing risk. Now, as we said, each build area represents its own project risk because, well, it's its own mini project, right? So we'd like to break those projects out and track them separately. And again, when possible, we use that bounded iterative approach and take care to only allow change at the design level, be it rigidly adherence to scope, and always keep in mind that phase 2 for unexpected problem areas or those that might be delayed by third parties. Okay, we're going to jump back into the methodology track and we're ready for the launch phase. And let's start with the content creation activity. Now, this is one that's pretty straightforward and involves looping in the key content owners and the subject experts to add content manually or by running the blueprints or templates if you've built those. It's also important here to provide training for those content owners because they're going to be the ones that help you scale by providing local support for your far-flung user communities after launch. Okay, still in the launch phase, the move-in activity is like content creation, but in bulk. So you might have external content to migrate into the system or existing content to reorganize into place. Now, these tasks are very difficult to assess at the start of a project because you don't really know where you're going until the design work, and often much of the build out is complete. And since it's an unknown thing, you guessed it, we're going to come back and use that solution design process. Right? And if automation is going to be used, we like to use a bounded iterative approach. And here, be realistic and expect maybe a 60% or so result for that first iteration, and then expect diminishing returns for additional turns of the crank. So perhaps plan for a few iterations and plan to finish the job by hand. That's a decent approach. Speaking of approaches, also be flexible in how you're going to tackle it. For example, if talk about your old system includes phrases like, oh, it's a total mess, or that stuff is 80% garbage, it might just be better to aim for the do nothing approach, which to us means leave the old system running, excuse me, in parallel for a while so users can migrate content incrementally after launch. On the other end of the spectrum, if existing content is well organized and mission critical, everything might need to be migrated before launch, which can be a big deal. Now, we've seen both approaches be very successful, as well as hybrids that combine the two. Just be aware that this is a big risk area and is frequently overlooked. Okay, finishing up the launch phase is launch planning. Now this is where you hook into your standard change management processes and think about how to raise awareness for the launch. It's also important to consider onboarding your new users. Please don't just send a registration link or a password reset. Think about maybe doing a short guided onboarding to accomplish something useful or meaningful to show a value for the system. Also consider the first 15 minutes your users are going to spend unguided. Is there something specific they can do that's meaningful? And it's a real bonus if you can think about what you want them to accomplish over the first couple of weeks. Here, the idea is to show that the system solves a pain point that they care about, so they'll want to come back and use it and explore further. Also, well before launch, make sure that your system infrastructure teams are lined up to do what's needed and plan to do dry runs for launch, recording specific steps so that you can build confidence that it will go smoothly. Okay, we're down to the home stretch here. We're down to the operating phase, and we're looking at ongoing collaboration. There's not much to be said here. This is just letting your teams dig in and use the system as designed. Now, all of the work that you've done up to this point should mean that it's clear to your community where to find information and how and where to contribute. Unfortunately, this isn't the activity that too many companies start with. We've seen this kind of often encouraged by the software vendors who are eager to make their tools sound like magic bullets that are simple enough to just turn on and go. But by skipping all the planning, it's also why most deployments we see turn out to be a complete mess after 12 to 18 months. But I know you guys aren't going to make that mistake, right? Right? Please say yes. Okay, the second activity in the operate phase is housekeeping. This is where content owners can make sure that content is in the right location, has the right labels applied, and old content gets updated or archived. This is also where site owners will want to extend designs to account for growth and change, and also make changes based on feedback gathered from the broader user community. Now finally, there's the checkup activity in the operate phase, and typically this is where your infrastructure team monitors and ensures the system is performing well. They'll keep the software up to date and licensed appropriately. And finally, and hopefully, working with you to add new tools when needed. The last thing we want to do here is to think about planning for another pass through this methodology in a year or so, as things in the organization will be very different and designs might be straining. Okay, congratulations, you guys made it through. I know that was a lot to cover, but by hanging in there, you learned our methodology and its phases and activities. You learned the 4 pillars of digital workplace design and important risk management considerations. And then you saw how to weave all 3 of these together to design and launch successful digital workplaces that will work now and stay relevant and durable for years after. So if you have questions but haven't had a chance to yet, please type them into the comment window. Afterwards, of course, you can always visit us on the web to get more information. And of course, feel free to contact us directly. We seriously love talking about this stuff, so please don't be bashful. Okay, Maggie, I'll turn it back to you for questions.